Chinedu Okafor was a name that echoed through the streets, not just in Nigeria, but around the world. He was the golden boy, the star, the man who turned a humble love song into a global sensation. Everywhere he went, cameras followed, and every move he made was front page news. But behind the fame and fortune, behind the glitz and glam, was a man still haunted by the shadows of his past. Sitting in his lavish Lagos apartment, Chinedu scrolled through social media, his face tense as headlines flashed about his engagement to Kioma, the hottest model on the continent. The media is already buzzing about your proposal. Kioma's publicist Tunde chimed in over the phone. It's all anyone can talk about. Chinedu's brows furrowed. This was supposed to be a secret. How did anyone even find out? You know how people are with celebrities' lives, total disregard for privacy. Tunde shrugged, his voice slick with nonchalance. But hey, look on the bright side. Kioma has modeling offers left and right now. And guess what? People Maxine offered $100,000 for exclusive photos of your wedding. Chinedu sighed deeply. I told Chioma that I wanted an intimate wedding. No guest list, no media, just us. Tunde's voice softened, feigning concern. I was just trying to be proactive. I can cancel everything if you want, but this is good exposure for all of us. Chinedu barely heard him. His phone buzzed again, an unknown number from Oyo, his hometown. He excused himself and answered, only to be met with the somber voice of Barrister Adebayo, an estate attorney. First, let me offer my condolences for your father's passing last month, Adebayo said. Thanks, but we weren't close, Chinedu replied flatly. My mom was much harder to lose. I'm sorry to hear that. I'm calling because your father left behind a property, a house. Do you have any plans for it? Chinedu's head skipped a bit. Memories flooded back. His parents' constant arguments, the nights he spent hidden under his blanket, wishing he could escape the noise. And yet, in those moments, there was always one person who made it bearable. Ngozi, his childhood friend, the one person who understood him. Let me send you a photo of the house, Adebayo continued. Chinedu's eyes glazed over the familiar image. It was exactly as he remembered, the weathered bricks, the rusty roof, the old wooden gate. Do you want to keep it or sell it? Adebayo asked. I I don't know, Chinedu stammered, his mind swirling. The memories of his past collided with the life he'd built, a life of luxury far removed from the dusty streets of his childhood. Just then, Chioma sauntered in, her heels clicking against the marble floor. She barely glanced at Chinedu as she spoke into her own phone. I convinced him to get me this big rock and hire my best friend as a publicist, didn't I? Trust me, I'll convince him to say yes to the media deal too. Chinedu clenched his jaw. He knew Kioma loved the spotlight more than she loved him. It was one thing to pretend for the cameras, but this was real. He couldn't help but wonder if Kioma truly cared. Wouldn't she understand why he wanted to keep things simple? The next day, Chinedu boarded a flight to Oyo. He needed to see the house one last time to decide its fate. A flight attendant named Adana noticed his tension and offered him some advice. Sometimes going home helps you find your heart again, she said with a kind smile. As the plane touched down, Chinedu felt the weight of nostalgia pulling him back. He hailed a cab, and the driver, Kabiru, immediately recognized him. You're a legend here, Chinedu. he exclaimed. Everyone knows where you grew up. Chinedu forced a smile, but his mind was elsewhere. He gazed out the window as the familiar sights of his hometown blurred past. It was then that he spotted her, Ngozi, tending to her horse outside her modest home. She hadn't changed much. Her hair was tied back, and she wore the same determined expression he remembered. Ngozi, he called out as he stepped out of the cab. She turned, her eyes widening in surprise. Chinedu, I thought you'd forgotten about us little people. Chinedu chuckled. Never. I've just been busy. They talked for hours, catching up on lost time. Ngozi told him about her struggles, how she was trying to save her family home from foreclosure. Chinedu listened, guilt gnawing at him. Here he was, with more money than he could ever need, and yet his best friend was barely scraping by. As the sun set, they walked back to the old house where Chinedu had grown up. It was quiet now, but the echoes of the past lingered. Remember when we promised we'd never get married unless it was to each other? Ngozi teased, trying to lighten the mood. Chinedu smiled, but his heart wasn't in it. Yeah, I remember. Suddenly, a voice interrupted them. Ngozi, we need to talk. It was Mr. Osifo again, the person managing the foreclosure of Ngozi's family home, holding a set of keys. The property has been sold, and the new buyer put it in your name. Ngozi looked at Chinedu, then at the keys. It was his chance to help her, to do something good with his wealth. Chinedu, was it you? But as he opened his mouth to speak, his phone buzzed again. It was Kioma. Have you sold the house yet? She asked, her tone impatient. I have everything set for the wedding at the Lagos State Hotel. It'll be iconic. Chinedu paused, the weight of the decision heavy on his shoulders. He looked at Ngozi, at the house that held so many memories, and at the life he could have if he chose differently. For the first time in a long time, he didn't know what to do. As Chinedu stands at the crossroads of his past and present, he faces a choice that will define his future. Will he cling to the glittering but hollow promises of fame? Or will he find the courage to follow his heart back to where it all began? Chinedu stared at the keys in Anozi's hand, the weight of his decisions pressing down on him like the heavy humidity of a storm about to break. He could hear Kioma's voice buzzing in his ear, filled with excitement about their upcoming wedding at the Lagos State Hotel, a venue she had insisted on for its grandeur and media appeal. But standing here, in front of the house where he grew up, all the noise of his new life seemed distant and hollow. Ngozi watched him closely, her eyes reflecting a mixture of hope and apprehension. She had always been his anchor, the one who knew him beyond the fame, beyond the image. And now, more than ever, Chinedu realized how much he had missed her steady presence. Chioma, I need to call you back, Chinedu said, cutting off her excited chatter. He hung up without waiting for a response, his mind racing. He turned to Ngozi as she held the keys. Ngozi, I can't let you lose your home, Chinedu said, his voice thick with emotion. This place, these memories, they're a part of us. Let me help you. Ngozi shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. Chinedu, you've done so much already. I can't ask you to. You're not asking, Chinedu interrupted, his tone firm but gentle. I'm offering. Your family, Nosy, and family doesn't turn their backs when things get tough. For a moment, there was only the sound of the wind rustling through the trees, carrying the scent of earth and rain. Ngozi looked at the keys again, her hand trembling. Thank you, she whispered, her voice breaking. I don't know how to repay you. Chinedu smiled, a genuine smile that he hadn't worn in a long time. You already have, just by being here, by being you. They spent the rest of the evening reminiscing, sharing stories of their childhood mischief and dreams they once had. As night fell, Chinedu picked up his guitar, the familiar strings under his fingers feeling like an old friend. He began to strum a melody, one that had been lingering in his mind since he stepped foot back in Oyo. Ngozi listened, her heart swelling with every note. It was the song he had struggled to write, the follow-up to his hit single that had eluded him for so long. But now the words flowed effortlessly, inspired by the very place and person that had shaped his heart. Come with me, Chinedu sang softly, his voice carrying through the quiet night. Back to where we belong, where love is strong and the past doesn't hold us back anymore. Ngozi closed her eyes, letting the music wash over her. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of peace. A peace that came from knowing that some things, no matter how much time passed, never truly changed. As the last chord faded, Chinedu looked at Ngozi, a new determination in his eyes. Ngozi, I don't want to live a life that's just about appearances. I want something real, something true. I want you. Ngozi's breath caught in her throat. Chinedu, are you sure? Your life, your world, it's so different now. Chinedu nodded, stepping closer. Yes, I'm sure. I've been chasing dreams that weren't even mine. But you, Ngozi, you've always been real. I don't want to let that go. Without another word, Chinedu reached into his pocket and pulled out the old ring they had used as kids. He knelt down on one knee, his eyes locking onto hers, with a gaze so intense it made her heart flutter. Ngozi, will you marry me? For real this time? Chinedu asked, his voice steady and sincere. Ngozi laughed through her tears, her joy bubbling over like a river breaking free from a dam. Yes, Chinedu, yes, I will. They embraced, the past and present, merging in a moment that felt like destiny. For Chinedu, this was not just about finding love. It was about finding his way back to who he truly was. And for Ngozi, it was the beginning of a new chapter, one where she didn't have to face her battles alone. The next morning, Chinedu woke up feeling lighter than he had in years. He picked up his phone and dialed Kyoma's number. She answered on the first ring, her voice sharp with anticipation. Have you sold the house yet? She demanded. Chinedu took a deep breath. No, Kyoma, I'm not selling the house. And about the wedding, I think we need to cancel it. There was a stunned silence on the other end. What? Are you out of your mind? No, Chinedu replied calmly. For the first time in a long time, I'm thinking clearly. I'm sorry, Kyoma, but I can't marry you. Chioma's voice rose, a mix of disbelief and anger. You're making a huge mistake, Chinedu. Maybe, Chinedu said, smiling as he glanced over at Ngozi, who was busy feeding her horse in the yard. But it's my mistake to make. Goodbye, Chioma. He hung up, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, it felt like he was heading in the right direction. Chinedu spent the next few days with Ngozi, making plans to restore the house and turn it into a sanctuary for others who needed a fresh start. They talked about the future, about their dreams, and how they could build a life together that was grounded in truth and love. On the day they announced their engagement, Chinedu released his new song, a heartfelt ballad inspired by his journey back to Oyo and the rediscovery of his true self. It quickly climbed the charts, resonating with listeners who connected with its raw honesty. But for Chinedu, the real victory was not the success of the song or the praise from his fans. It was the quiet moments he shared with Ngozi, the laughter and the simple joy of being with someone who knew and loved him for who he was, not for who the world expected him to be. In the end, Chinedu had found something far more valuable than fame or fortune. He had found home. Moral lesson: it's not the riches we accumulate or the fame we achieve that define us. It's the connections we hold dear and the courage to stay true to ourselves, even when the world tries to pull us in a different direction. Chinedu's story is a reminder that sometimes the answers we seek are not in the bright lights of the big city, but in the quiet whispers of our past. As Chinedu and Gozi take their first steps towards a new future, we're reminded that home is not a place, it's a feeling, a bond, a love that endures. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If you were moved by this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more tales that speak to the heart. Until next time, remember, true happiness is found when we are brave enough to follow our hearts back home